Welcome, Gunrunner.
As regular viewers of my channel will know, I usually rotate between covering a home computer and a console in my amazing exclusive series. But it struck me the other day that I haven't done a handheld for a while, and as I've already covered both the Nintendo Game Boy and the Atari Lynx, it only seems right that the Sega Game Gear gets the treatment next. And I'm sure that a lot of you are wondering just how many actual exclusives the Game Gear has, because by virtue of it basically being a portable master system, most of its most famous games appeared on the home console hardware too. And indeed, before I started researching this video, I thought the same too, because even though the Game Gear outlived its big brother in most of the West, the master system went on forever in Brazil, and Tectoy themselves ported lots of games across the two platforms. So I was pretty surprised to see just how many Game Gear exclusives there actually were when I looked down the list, making my selection decisions a lot harder than I first thought they'd be. This is certainly a system I can return to with a follow-up video at some point in the future. What I tried to do with my final selection was balance different types of games, which actually saw me replace two of the entries at last minute. Another reason why I want to come back to it at some point. And so I hope that I gave you a nice range of titles to try out. But of course, you might be a massive Game Gear fan and have played all these before, and have some of your own suggestions, so please add them down in the comments and let me know what you thought of my own selections at the end, because it's your contributions that make this channel so great. Now let's get on with the show.
Hey man, get portable. Get a Game Gear Supersonic Sports Pack. A color portable Game Gear, carrying case, and 2 hit games. Sonic 2, and the Majors Pro Baseball. Whoa, even save $50. The Game Gear Supersonic Sports Pack. You know who makes it.
Coffee? Tea?
Released in 1991, this was the very first Shinobi game to appear on a handheld platform, and also a totally original game that, whilst having plenty of similarities with the other Shinobi games, adds many elements of its own. The game it's probably most similar to is the Mega Drive's Revenge of Shinobi. No bad thing, I hear you cry. This also means it's incredibly tough. As before, you take the role of Joe Musashi, and like the original game, your mission is to rescue some kidnapped children from different locations around the city. This sees you fighting your way through the 4 enemy-ridden levels, each with an end-of-level boss, and these can be played in any order. There is some nice variation in the different stages, and the level that takes place on the freeway is a particular highlight, as you jump from car to car. As always, you're equipped with ninja shurikens that can be thrown at enemies, as well as your own fighting skills, and the limited magic that can be saved for those tricky situations. Graphically, this game is beautiful with nicely animated sprites, rich colours and superb attention to detail. There's always been a certain flair to Shinobi games, and this is no exception. There is also some great music that plays throughout the game and helps set the scene. Despite the at times brutal difficulty level, GG Shinobi is right up there with the best games for the Sega handheld. The original Galaga coin-up from 1981 was a sequel to the even more classic Galaxian, released 2 years before, and was one of the very first shoot 'em ups to feature vertical scrolling. In 1987, Namco released yet another sequel following 1984's Gaplus in the form of Galaga 88. This Game Gear title is a somewhat modified version of that game, featuring many of the same gameplay mechanics, including the more varied alien formations, dive-bombing kamikazes, and expert skill shots all in attendance. The main difference between Galaxian and Galaga was that the formations changed as the game went on, and the enemies got faster and more intelligent. This update of the Coin-Op Classic adds even more to the mix, with different gameplay modes, new levels, different paths, power-ups, and of course both updated graphics and sound. Best of all though, it does all of this without losing any of the things that made the original game so fantastic. Also known as Galaga 2, this GG entry is very nice indeed, and loses nothing on the small screen. The graphics look great with clearly defined sprites and minimal blur, and the sound effects are fantastic too. For me, Galaga 91 is pretty much the perfect combination between single screen old school blasters and more modern scrolling shooters. There are some really good space themed shoot 'em ups available for the Game Gear, but this one is definitely my favourite. I have to confess that I'm an absolutely huge fan of columns, and in fact I was such a huge fan of the Game Gear port after playing it on an import model owned by one of my rich school friends that I very nearly bought the portable myself, only changing my mind to buy an Atari Lynx at the last minute. I know the game was available for plenty of other platforms, but it just seems so well suited to the handheld hardware, a bit like Tetris on the Game Boy I suppose. But it's only in very recent years that I discovered a Game Gear only sequel existed, and I'm pleased to say that it's just as essential. They've taken the classic gem matching gameplay and added a bunch of new features to up the ante. As well as the ability to turn the columns round rather than just switch the order of the gems, there are also a host of new block types including glitter columns, which remove gems of the same type from the grid, reversal columns, which flips the grid upside down, magic columns, which clear all the gems above a section, and lanterns, which can clear a whole row, column or grid. There is also a brand new story mode here too, which also brings in another new mechanic, the ability to cast spells. You earn these by matching gems, and then they let you handicap your opponents in various different ways. The visuals here are great, the audio is even better, and the gameplay is as furiously addictive as ever. Given how popular the Mega Man franchise was, and indeed still is, it seems really strange that so few people are aware of this Game Gear only entry in the series. It also seems quite strange that the game is licensed out to British publishers US Gold, and has such a generic name that it does nothing to differentiate it from the other entries in the series. Like a lot of other Game Gear games on this list, that are also part of famous franchises, GG Mega Man borrows quite heavily from other titles that came before it, in this case borrowing both bosses and stages from Mega Man 4 and 5. As before, Mega Man is able to run, jump, shoot and climb his way past obstacles, and is also joined by his robotic canine companion Rush, who is able to help our hero jump higher using an ability called Rush Coil. Robot Masters featured at the beginning of the game are Bright Man, Napalm Man, Starman and Stone Man, whilst Mega Man 4's antagonist Dr. Cossack's Fortress contains Wave Man's and Toad Man's levels and respective bosses, whilst Wily's Fortress is Quick Man's stage from Mega Man 2, with the Wily fight taken from Mega Man 5. Neither the graphics nor sound are anything special here, very similar to the NES entries actually, but the familiar gameplay will greatly please fans of the Mega Man franchise, and the game certainly offers up a pretty decent challenge too. I will never understand why that apart from the Atari Lynx port, none of the other home console versions of Ninja Gaiden are a conversion of the arcade game. Instead, the various coders decided to create some kind of platform fighting hybrid using the same name. Like the many other Ninja Gaiden games for other systems, Sega's GG entry also features the back-flipping ninja Ryo Hayabusa, who would later go on to star in the Dead or Alive games in his natty blue outfit. The GG game is fairly similar to the Master System and PC Engine versions of the game, with some very similar gameplay, but very different level layouts. All you need to do here is run and jump around each level on a single plane, jumping on platforms, taking out enemies and collecting the items. You have a sword at your disposal, and this can be upgraded by collecting the power-ups. At the end of each level you have to face a boss, and this is where most of the actual fighting takes place, as most of the other enemies can be taken out with a single hit. Thankfully there are no one-hit kills in this iteration, instead you have a power bar that goes down when you hit and can be replenished. Although it's still not a patch on the excellent arcade original, or the Lynx port for that matter, GG Ninja Gaiden is still a very enjoyable game that features some nice visuals, decent sound and some pretty challenging gameplay too. I have to start this review by saying that I'm a huge fan of Compile in general, and indeed the Aleste series is certainly a big reason for that. I'm sure that there are plenty of others that feel the same, so the existence of a Game Gear exclusive title in the franchise is a real boon for the handheld. In particular, I'm a real fan of the original MSX entries, so I was pleasantly surprised to learn that the same programmer behind those games also did GG Aleste. This was because of his existing familiarity with the Zilog Z80 processor that both systems share. Here we have 7 stages of non-stop shoot-em-up action in the vertical style that shares much in common with the games that came before it. Although, Compile did put particular focus on designing the game around the much smaller screen, and it shows. They have scaled down the size of the bosses and many enemies without losing any detail, making the game a real joy to play. As before, there are 8 different power-ups that can be collected and upgraded, but you have to make sure you keep picking up the same one, because otherwise your power is reset and you have to start again. In terms of which power-up is best, that very much depends on the level, which is one of the cleverest aspects of Aleste. Graphics are great, the music is superb and the gameplay really does hit the sweet spot for shoot 'em up junkies. One of the things I like most about doing these amazing exclusives videos is discovering great games that I never even knew existed, and in this particular video there's no doubting that Arena Maze of Death is the best example. Prior to sitting down and writing this, I never even knew the game existed. It's hardly a surprise because, as you can no doubt see from the 1996 release date, it was one of the very last games Sega released for the handheld, and the year of release is very much evident in the way the game looks, because the 3D isometric graphics are almost 16-bit quality. The game itself actually reminded me a little of the early Metal Gear titles, with less focus on stealth and more attention given to the run and gun elements. The plot has somewhat of a Running Man vibe to it, with you trying to fight your way through several heavily militarised zones in order to reach a TV station and broadcast a tape showing all the shady business an evil organisation has been getting up to. So you'll find yourself running around defeating enemies, collecting objects, including some very useful power-ups, and trying to find the exit to the next zone. Each map has its own unique hazards, so you'll have to keep your wits about you. I mentioned the amazing visuals, but Arena also has a stunning soundtrack too. This game is right up there with the GG's very best. I absolutely loved the Panzer Dragoon games on the Sega Saturn. In fact, the second entry still ranks amongst my famous video games of all time. So when I learned that there was an exclusive Game Gear offering, I was excited as I was surprised. Like the Saturn games, this is also an on-rail shooter, although a much more limited one that doesn't feature any of the 3D effects of its more illustrious siblings. In fact, the game actually plays quite a lot like the famous Sega Super Scaler games, Afterburner and G-Lock, with you viewing your dragon from a third-person perspective with enemies flying towards you from the horizon. Like those games, you have standard shots as well as lock-ons to target specific enemies. More like the Saturn games, however, is the way each level is themed and ends in a boss battle. However, it's a bit of a shame that there's no story of any kind that explains where you are going and why. Rather than lives, your dragon has an energy bar, and once that's depleted, it's game over. Panzer Dragoon Mini certainly has some impressive graphics and sound, and the password feature is a really nice thing to have. but it has to be said that the gameplay is a little lacking compared to the original Sega Saturn games, and you may find yourself getting a bit bored of the repetitive gameplay. However, there was no way that I could leave it out of this list due to my huge love for the franchise. This early Game Gear title has a somewhat cult status amongst owners of the handheld, and it's often brought up in all those hidden gem lists you see online. The game starts with a short animated intro showing a beautiful princess and a boy falling in love, but then an evil wizard named Popil kidnaps her and traps her inside an enchanted forest, so it's up to the boy to rescue her. How do you do this? Well, by solving puzzles in a platformer styled environment, of course. So each level is laid out on a single screen made up of blocks, with the princess trapped somewhere within them. You have to try and reach her by smashing the correct blocks, which is very easy at the start but gets very complicated later on with either your fists or your head. As well as the standard blocks you can break, there are also ladder blocks which you can climb, door blocks which take you to another part of the screen, and spikes. The latter of these are very important once the enemies are also introduced, because you can only kill your foes by making them fall onto the spikes. As well as having no less than 100 stages to work through, Popils also includes an amazing level designer where you can make up to 30 of your own and then save them to the cartridge for your friends to try out. Popils is a simply charming little game that is both addictive and fiendish in equal measure, and a real GG must-have. Actually quite a lot of Sonic games that are exclusive to the Game Gear. I could have almost made a whole video with just these titles being featured, in fact. But I only wanted to include one here, to make sure there was plenty of variation, and Sonic Triple Trouble seems to be the best bet, though the two games starring Tails and Sonic Drift are also pretty interesting to me. I think the reason I like this one the most is because it's a very traditional Sonic game, although at the time some of the press actually criticised the game for being too familiar. The player controls either Sonic or Tails as they head out to stop Dr. Robotnik, Knuckles the Echidna, and serious newcomer Knack the Weasel from stealing the ever-valuable Chaos Emeralds. The game is made up of 6 different zones that each contain 3 levels and include all the usual play mechanics. Both characters can execute a spin dash, but they each have their own individual ability to play with too, with Sonic able to perform a peel-out move as previously introduced in Sonic CD, whereas Tails can fly for a short amount of time. As well as the standard power-ups, there are also ones unique to each character too, such as Sonic's Jetboard and Tails' Sea Fox items. This actually means that depending on who you play as, your route through each level can be quite different. Sonic Triple Trouble is both technically impressive and a real joy to play.
Whoa. Color.
Hey, there's an easier way to get color. Get a Game Gear, the full color portable with over 150 games, like the new Echo, Mortal 2, and Sonic Triple Trouble. Sega!
And that rounds out my look at 10 amazing Sega Game Gear exclusives. Can't think of any other one-off titles that only ever came out for this ever popular handheld. Or do you think some of these games were unworthy of inclusion? We'd also love to hear the thoughts and views of my audience, so please get typing in that comments section. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons to continue to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following patrons and YouTube backers in particular for their much appreciated pledges: Paul Daniel, Mins, Dos Gamerman, Luke MC, Carl Olsen, Seth Robinson, Grady Haynes, Mark Strickland, Colin Torn, Trogdor the Burninator, Daniel Skorowski, Ben P. Stein, Tabby Kitsune, Alan J. Dodds, and Electrum Star Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go check out my Patreon right now. You can get access to host extra content, including downloads, exclusive videos, creative insights, and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching, I'll see you all again for another video very soon.